For the first time in American history, Republican candidates are going to contest more than 70 congressional districts that have always before gone by default. And for the first time in the history of this country, all 23 congressional seats in this great state of Texas will be contested for, and we are going to win them. The Republican Party can win the South in 1964. And the Republican Party can and will win the election in 1964.
Whereas Barry Goldwater is a candidate for the Republican nomination as President of the United States, be it resolved that the Republican Party of Texas, in convention assembled, does hereby assert its support of Barry Goldwater for President of the United States, and be it further resolved that this convention hereby elect a delegation of 56 delegates and 56 alternates from Texas to the 1964 Republican National Convention in July at San Francisco, irrevocably committed by resolution to Senator Barry Goldwater.
The Republican Party can win in 1964 only if it wins substantial support in the South. And I am one Republican candidate that's proud and happy to recognize the South as part of the United States. Something else. Our opposition knows this, and let us never forget it. And I, for one, don't intend to forget it, and whatever the dopesters and the pollsters say, whatever we hear from the doom shouters in both parties, I intend to lead all the candidates of our party to victory, north and south, east and west, in November. I intend to lead a united party on a platform of principle, the same platform and the same principle in every part of this nation. I mean principles of leadership, principles which will preserve our federal republic, principles of respect for constitutional government, for law and order. I mean the principles that look upon violence in the streets anywhere in this land, regardless of who does it, as the wrong way to resolve great moral questions. This is the way that will destroy the liberties of all our people. And I come before you today to make no sectional appeals. The issues now confronting our nation go beyond any one section or any special interest. They go right to the heart of America's destiny as a free and constitutional republic, and they involve the hopes of freedom everywhere in the world. fellow Americans, fellow Republicans. I've looked forward to this for a long, long time, but I never in my wildest dreams imagined that the reception would be anything like this, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, before we get started this morning, I would like to acknowledge two young gentlemen here on the stand behind me. One is Dick Morgan, who has headed up my effort in this state. Dick? And I don't think there's any greater pride than a father can have in the fact that his children are willing to quit their jobs and go out and stump for him. In fact, I had all of them going, but one of them's going to get married next week, and the other has to take care of her 4 children, and one of them wound up with an ulcer. That's what politics will do for you. But I do have my youngest son, Mike, here this morning, who just came down from Wisconsin. Mike, will you take a bow? I want to thank the... Viva! Viva! Yo sabe! I want to thank the mayor of Dallas for his cordial reception, and I want to acknowledge once again the feeling that I have, the feeling that all Americans have, I believe, of debt to you people of Texas for having sent Bruce Alger to the House and for having given us from the western part of Texas, that's the part that Arizonans calls themselves neighbors to, Ed Foreman, the young dynamic congressman. And I don't know whether you realize it or not, but yesterday, the 15th, was the anniversary when that great television operator swore in John Tower as a senator of the United States. And I'm happy to see so many people from Oklahoma here today to pay homage to a great man, a man who is going to represent the state of Oklahoma in the United States Senate, a good friend of mine, one of the great examples for young people all over this country, Bud Wilkinson. And it would be damage to my conscience if I failed to mention a name that has been very close to me throughout the years that I've served in the Senate, a name of a man that I served with on committees in the United States Senate, a man that I believe to be one of the great contributions of the Republican Party to the Senate of the United States, and that was Senator Prescott Bush, whose son George is running and will win the seat here in Texas. And finally, but not the least, the man responsible for my being here this morning, being in this position of being a man who's been losing state elections but getting delegates, is a fellow Texan of yours, a great state chairman, Peter O'Donnell, who's responsible for it, and I thank him. You know, a very funny thing has happened in this country. Funny things happen in America all the time, thank the Lord, but this is really an amusing one. It's not funny peculiar, but it's funny ha-ha. All of a sudden, all of the radical columnists, men like Walter Lippmann, Alsop, Drummond, Childs, all the radical newspapers like the New York Times. No, don't boo anybody. We'll show them. Now, some of you here might wonder why I'm here this morning. And I want to apologize at the outset if I seem at times to be in a little bit of a hurry, but I do have to catch a plane because we have some rather important legislation. Now, if anyone wants to know why and how we're going to win in 1964, let him come here and get his answer. We're going to win. We're going to win because we are now truly a national party. We are no longer a party that has to write off one great section of this nation, the South.
Trade out here today. There is nobody here that didn't come at a certain amount of pain and suffering, and I trust that people in government will not cause you any more pain or suffering because you're here. They better not, or better not try. As a matter of fact, I am hopeful. As of last week, I think the White House is even open to me again. I got 2 people through it last week. Now let me point out, friends, it needs to be said over and over again. We are the home for not only Republicans. Why are we Republicans? I'm a Republican and you're a Republican because first, we're not only Americans, we are constitutional Americans, and we give to the people of this nation the only possible, the only conceivable home. And that's why if they want to have all of the new frontier down there in Houston, let us keep our doors wide open so that many others will join us, as many of you have, in this crusade for what we know to be Jeffersonian principles, which the Democratic Party marched off and left behind when they joined the Walter Reuther's, the David Dubinskys, the Adam Clayton Powells. You know what I'm talking about. Finally, when somebody starts talking about the mainstream of American thinking, you don't have to turn to the Republican Party, although we have that in the guts of the organization in our thinking. Just look at the basic American principles that all of us champion. We championed these before we're Republicans, but it's in this vehicle and this vehicle alone of the two that we have an opportunity to present what used to be the mainstream of the other party too. And we've got a man who's not afraid to present that. And the mainstream is us, and it's the United States as it has always been traditionally, and as you and I are going to see it's going to be in the future. And therefore, I both predict to you, and I'm not doing this presumptuously because I presume that all of us go into every campaign as though it were the toughest campaign we ever had. Look at this stadium, this auditorium. Every last seat is taken, if I can see correctly, and I understand they're still trying to find places to park in a mile or so of this auditorium. In any event, friends, this is what we'll do.
A bit of missed signals already. Take this opportunity to introduce my wife, Mary, who's sitting out here somewhere. Mary? I must admit that this atmosphere of friendly cooperation is a little different. The last 7 years that I've been here, I've left with that bitter taste of defeat in my mouth, and today I sense victory, very sincerely. One thing that those of us in coaching learn quickly is this factor of criticism, and I guess you learn this in also. I've recalled since the campaign began, every now and then someone doesn't quite agree with something that I say. The first year that I coached, we lost our first game, we won our next game, we came down here to Dallas and literally got run right out of the Cotton Bowl by the University of Texas. When I was going to work the next Monday morning, I had read the newspaper, and at that point the sports writers were in total agreement. I was too young to be a football coach. I lacked experience, all of these other factors that certainly appeared to be relevant at that time. And this didn't be a great deal. I always picked up Gomer Jones, our line coach, on the way to work, and so I told Gomer this morning how I was very upset about this, and Gomer said, you just really have got to look all of those things. He said, when people criticize you and write that kind of a column, he said, my advice is don't even bother to ignore it. So we'll try to do those things that are right, as the Republican Party has always done. And those people who do not agree, if we can communicate, will definitely be the minority group. And I say that the free world deserves better planning than that. And I also say that the men who man this great command for peace deserve a better chance than that. And I suggest also that your children deserve a better chance. a chance to live at peace and in freedom, and not under the terrible cloud of a war that we cannot prevent and could not win. The first order of business, ladies and gentlemen, in this field for a new Republican president should be to guarantee that our military force has the best weapons to give us the best chance to deter war and keep the peace. I'm tired of the packets of misinformation coming out of the civilian Pentagon that try to compare the Soviet strategic missile force with ours without counting in the Soviet intermediate range ballistic missile force, which is a strategic force aimed at our allies. And when you add those two together, whether you like it or not, we are in second place. And I defy the Czar of the Pentagon to dispute that statement. It is weakness that encourages the Soviet. It is only strength that discourages them. It is strength that holds the only hope of finally convincing them that their goals of world conquest must be dropped, that the aspirations of free men must be respected, and that no political fanaticism can be permitted in this century to build and maintain a wall of tyranny around the citizens of all nations. Where has weakness brought this world? Where has it brought this world since the end of the Second World War? 12 nations have fallen to communism. 800 million people have been dragged behind the Iron Curtain. In the years immediately after the Korean War, saw freedom holding firm. But since then, in the past 3 years alone, Laos has been torn apart, Indonesia has been set afire, Africa has been plunged into a bloody turmoil, Latin America has been terrorized, and South Vietnam has been soaked with American blood while being sacrificed to indecision. Now, most of you have probably read in the magazine U.S. News and World Report and later in Life magazine the agonizing letters of a man, Captain Edwin Schenck, written from Vietnam, written from the heart of a soldier who was sickened by the neglect of his government. Captain Schenck was killed in Vietnam. He wasn't killed offering technical advice to the Vietnamese. He was killed fighting for freedom in Vietnam. And Captain Schenck, in painful detail, tells of the ancient aircraft with which he and his fellow pilots were forced to fight, and in which they died, and in which they still die. Is it our military leaders who have sent our flyers into battle with such old and inadequate equipment? No. The politicians have done it. And as one very interested in air, they are now unpickling more ancient aircraft 35 miles west of my hometown to ship over there. Not that they're not good aircraft, but someday they're going to run out of pickled airplanes. And what are we going to fight with, bows and arrows? Let me quote to you from a letter that is, in its way, every bit as shocking as any written by Captain Schenck. It was written by the Assistant Secretary of State, Frederick Dutton, to a colleague of mine in the Congress. And just listen to this. I read, "We believe the equipment currently being used by American personnel and provided to the Vietnamese is safe and adequate for the job." End of the quote. Now listen to Captain Schenck. "We are getting beat. We are undermanned and undergunned. We're using equipment and bombs from World War II, and it's not too reliable. The Air Force hasn't used any of this equipment since Korea. Lost 2 guys today. The only guess is the airplane just came apart." Then what was that airplane? It was a B-26, a relic of the Second World War. And as a pilot who loved that airplane, I don't like to cast aspersions at it, but the birds get tired when you fly them hard, and metal comes apart just like humans. These are things that computers can't tell those gray flannel people in the Pentagon. These are things that General LeMay can tell Mr. McNamara if he wants to listen. These are things that the Joint Chiefs of Staff have learned through experience, not out of a Ouija board or a computer. Officially, they say we are using obsolete equipment in Vietnam because of the Geneva Convention, which were supposed to bring peace to that area. What peace? And what respect has the enemy shown to these conventions? When will this, the mightiest nation on earth, stop sacrificing the lives of its men to the whims of its politicians? And I charge again that the death of men like Captain Schenck, sent to die in obsolete equipment, must lie heavily upon the conscience of the defense and foreign policy planners who have directed the failure and the continuing failure in Vietnam so far. How many more Captain Schencks will have to die before we call a halt to the policies of failure and defeat? How much more will freedom around the world have to suffer before we call a halt to retreat from reality and responsibility in foreign policy? How much more will war be risked in a pell-mell rush to disarm and in failure to provide new defenses? When will America turn to the sort of leadership that has always kept the peace in the past? The peace of Ike Eisenhower. Yes, the historic peace of our party, the Republican Party, the party of peace. Now let me for a few moments visit with you as a practicing Republican politician, and darn proud of it. I believe the Republican Party, which is a minority party by a very, very large margin, must present, I should say, a united front come November. Now, I'm criticized for asking for unity in this party, but I think it's the one weakness of our party. It's the great strength of the opposition party. They'll disown a man in a primary more vividly than we ever thought of, and yet when it comes November, he's their man. Now, you may disagree very violently with my positions on various issues. You may agree. You may disagree with other Republicans, or you may agree. But I can tell you this, that you cannot win in Texas, we cannot win in Arizona, we cannot win in the United States because we are a minority party almost every place, and we have to appeal in a united way to those millions and millions and millions of unhappy, disgusted, disenfranchised Democrats who believe just as you and I believe about the problems of our country and the answers to the problems. There is no magic to winning elections. There's no secret word. There's no certain amount of millions of dollars that must be spent. There's no cut and dried television image. There's only one thing that wins elections, and that's people like you, people at the grassroots. The only thing